stick with me because you never had anybody negotiating for the farmers before me as president.
The attention of the Congress is on them as well to make sure they have the resources to be able to make those corrections too.
We have full confidence that we can go on. We're getting resumes from all over. We're getting offers from all over. People are jumping in to help us.
Hello, I'm Nancy Cordes in Washington, and welcome to America Decides. Our latest CBS News polling shows Vice President Kamala Harris is making some gains on former President Donald Trump in her bid for the White House. Look at this. Harris is now up 4 points nationally over Trump, and she holds a slimmer 2-point advantage in the battleground states. Today, Trump is back in Pennsylvania for a policy roundtable with farmers and then a rally later tonight. And we've just learned he'll return to the site of his first assassination attempt, announcing a rally on October 5th in Butler, Pennsylvania. The vice president is expected to focus on the economy and foreign policy this week. But today, Second Gentleman Doug Emhoff hit the trail for the Harris-Walz campaign, speaking at 2 events in San Antonio. Aaron Navarro is covering the Harris campaign for us tonight here in Washington, and Libby Cathy is traveling with the Trump campaign in Pennsylvania. Libby, let's start with you. Today, former President Donald Trump is back in Pennsylvania. What was his message to voters there?
Yeah, good afternoon, Nancy, or good evening, I should say. His message in Smithton, Pennsylvania at that farming roundtable, former President Trump said he will protect the American farmer. He also talked about tariffs. We hear this from the former president a lot. And he put the company John Deere on notice at that event by name, the iconic American tractor company, and said that they will have a 200% tariff on any goods they make in Mexico that are imported into the U.S. Of course, we've been reporting for a while now that economists say that those costs could be passed on to the American consumer. But Trump also saying at that policy roundtable that he would move to make these tariffs in action without the support of Congress potentially. So definitely a policy farming focused message this morning in Smithton, but now this afternoon in Indiana, Pennsylvania, we're at this college basketball stadium. The message I'm told Trump will be delivering here tonight is to get out the vote with 43 days to go.
Aaron, the economy, as Libby was just describing, has been front and center for these candidates throughout the campaign. And we're now getting some indication in our new CBS News polling that actually Vice President Harris is finally starting to benefit from an improving economy. How is the campaign reacting to this?
That's right. It's now a 6-point gap between Harris and Trump among voters who say the economy is a major factor. If you look at August, that was 13 points. A lot of those things that were factors you mentioned were out of Harris's control. Gas prices are going down, inflation rate remaining steady, the interest rate being cut. But you are seeing the Harris campaign lean on issues that I'm told by operatives in swing states are important factors on the economy. Grocery prices, one, acknowledging that they're too high, saying that they'll crack down on those, and we've only heard the specific price gouging idea from Harris so far. We'll see if she makes more remarks on Wednesday. And also housing affordability. That's been a big part of Harris's economic plan. Democrats I've talked to say not a lot of people know about that plan yet, but when they do hear about it, they like those 2 aspects of it.
Right. She says she's going to be unveiling more economic proposals in Pittsburgh a little bit later this week. Libby, former President Trump was in North Carolina on Saturday amidst this controversy over GOP governor candidate Mark Robinson and the comments that he made online reportedly about being a black Nazi. How is the Trump campaign dealing with this situation? Have they said point blank that they want Robinson to drop out?
Yeah, the Trump campaign, Nancy, so far not calling on Robinson to drop out. We are not expecting them to. Trump, like you said, was in North Carolina this weekend, did not appear with Robinson amid the CNN reporting, although at past rallies in the state, Trump has had Robinson up on stage with him. Corey Lewandowski, a Trump advisor, did an interview with CNN this weekend, and he said they're not focused on Mark Robinson. They're focused on winning a presidential election. He rejected any idea that Robinson could bring Trump down the ticket. They view the presidential race as its own entity in North North Carolina and every battleground state for that matter. But I think we can expect the Trump campaign to distance themselves from Robinson, even if they aren't explicitly saying that. For instance, J.D. Vance is in the state today, has an event, has not appeared with Mark Robinson, who is also back out on the campaign trail in that state today. And Trump, knowing this state is important, already returning to North Carolina later this week. We will be there with him on Wednesday, Nancy.
And the Harris team equally determined to prevent Donald Trump from creating any distance between himself and Mark Robinson. They're already airing ads about it.
That's right. They're looking to tie him to Mark Robinson in the state. And especially they think that it can help with inroads with moderate Republican voters as well as black voters in that crucial swing state.
Vice President Harris was on the fundraising circuit this weekend. They said that she raised $27 million on Sunday alone. And then she once again challenged Donald Trump to a second debate. Let's listen to both what she had to say and what he had to say about that this weekend.
Join me on the debate stage. Let's have another debate. There's more to talk about, and the voters of America deserve to hear the conversations that I think we should be having on substance, on issues, on policies. What's your plan? What's my plan? And we should have another one before Election Day.
It's too late to do another. I'd love to in many ways, but it's too late. The voting is cast.
So Trump says he's not going to do it. That he's been fairly consistent on that front for a couple of weeks now. Why does the Harris campaign keep pushing it?
From talking to Democrats and those supporting the campaign, it's a couple of reasons. One, the fact that she's projecting so much confidence. One strategist put it to me like this. They feel that she is trying to create herself and make herself seem as the alpha in the situation, kind of cut into that kind of persona Trump has really tied himself to, especially among younger white male voters. The second part is this is a big platform for her to get her message out. And there's probably the only one left in the 43 days until the November election day. There's no other big place for her to be and really get her message out, talk about her policy plans. And that's not a debate stage. They're obviously confident that she can take him on and win again, should that actually happen.
And Trump says there's no time. Obviously, there is time. Have you gotten any sense from your talks with the Harris campaign that they actually think there might be a chance that this debate could happen?
They pointed to kind of some of the back and forth Trump had before that first debate, whether he would pull out because of the moderators, whether he claimed that it was rigged before and would try and discredit it and make his supporters think that it wasn't going to be a fair debate anyways. They're operating in the same kind of headspace, thinking Trump is a bit unpredictable. We'll see, but they're obviously pushing for one.
Yep. Oh, well, we'd love to have one. So, Aaron Navarro, thank you so much for that reporting, and Libby Cathy as well. Thank you. And a quick programming note, join us here on CBS News 24/7 early on October 1st at 4 p.m. Eastern for a special vice presidential debate edition of America Decides, live from New York City. CBS News will moderate the debate and bring you coverage all evening long. A federal judge has ordered the suspect in the apparent assassination attempt on former President Donald Trump to remain behind bars until his trial. Prosecutors revealed the man left a handwritten letter months before the incident in which he wrote, quote, "This was an assassination attempt on Donald Trump." Manuel Bojorquez is in West Palm Beach, Florida. Manny, so good to see you. So what was the judge's reasoning for denying this suspect's bail?
Well, Nancy, in this particular case, the judge said that there was enough evidence presented by the prosecution to basically persuade him that Ryan Ruth is a flight risk and could be a danger to the community based on his previous criminal record, but also based on what the prosecution was alleging, that when he was discovered in that vehicle trying to get away from the Mar-a-Lago and Golf Club area, that they say they found 6 phones in his vehicle and a passport. And on one of those phones, they claim there was a Google search on how to get from Palm Beach County to Mexico. Another piece of evidence there is, according to prosecutors, the scope on the rifle, they say, was partly put together and tied on with tape. And off of that tape, they say they were able to lift a fingerprint that comes back to Ruth. For those reasons, the judge decided that he would have to remain in custody until he is put on trial.
Wow, such fascinating and also frightening details. Manny, We learned so much from prosecutors today about this suspect. What are they revealing about him and his motivations?
Well, you know, he's had so many writings, public writings out there, including a book in which he hinted at the assassination of the former president and really obsessed with this notion of defending Ukraine. What we learned from prosecutors is that they believe he came to the South Florida area back in August, almost a month before this happened. And they have cell phone data, they say, that indicates that he may have been around the golf club and Mar-a-Lago for nearly a month. And then, as we've noted in previous reporting, that he was on that fence line there for nearly 12 hours. So they painted the picture of someone who seemed determined to try to carry this out. And in fact, they said that had that agent not spotted the gunman, regardless of who it was, that the president was maybe former president, I should say, 12 to 15 minutes from coming to that sixth hole there and being right in the line of sight of the rifle.
Unbelievable. So what are the next steps in this case?
Well, as you know, the only charges right now against this suspect, Ryan Ruth, are federal gun charges for possessing a firearm as a convicted felon. What we learned today in court is that prosecutors will also seek to get a grand jury to indict him on another heavier charge, really, which is the attempted assassination of a political figure. The gun charges carry a maximum combined of about 20 years in prison. The attempted assassination on a political figure, if the grand jury decides to go that route, well, the maximum sentence there is life in prison.
And as far as we know so far, is he cooperating?
The defense made a big point out of that. They said, look, this is a guy who's mild-mannered. He hasn't had any outbursts in court, and he cooperated with authorities, but only once they had reached him in that vehicle, as they say, that he was attempting to flee. And they noted that even though he has a criminal history, that nowhere in there is there an indication of violence or resisting arrest with law enforcement. But again, the judge said, look, the weight of these charges and of the evidence, I just am not willing to let him out on bond.
Not surprising. Manuel Bojorquez, thank you so much for all those details. Appreciate it. Our new CBS News poll finds voters' views of the economy are brightening. We'll share some more interesting takeaways from that poll when we come back. You're streaming America Decides. Stick around. Welcome back to America Decides. The presidential race is incredibly tight in the 7 battleground states that could decide the election. And CBS News rates all of them as toss-ups. CBS News Executive Director of Elections and Surveys, Anthony Salvanto, joins us now. Anthony, any day that you've got new numbers is a great day. Tell us what the race looks like in each of these battleground states according to our new poll.
Hey there, Nancy. Good to talk to you. Look, here's the national numbers, which is +4 Harris. Now, that's interesting, but what really counts, as you mentioned, are the battlegrounds. And that we have is +1 Harris. That is a very small shift. In fact, that is a 1-point shift from where it was last month. So just to kind of underline that idea of things being really tight, when we go out and run the CBS estimates from the models on each of the battleground states, the story here is everything is even or effectively even, right? Pennsylvania, we talk so much about, is even. And all of these states, Arizona is effectively even. Georgia, +1 Trump, that's effectively even. The story here is, people say, okay, well, a lot of folks thought Harris had a strong debate. What happened? In fact, in our polling, we had more people on net say that the debate had made them more likely to consider Harris, more so than more likely to consider Trump. Okay, but if you look inside who these folks are, they largely voted for Joe Biden in 2020. And what that tells you is that this little shift towards Harris is really her consolidating that 2020 Joe Biden base, that electorate that she needs to have a chance. But it's also explaining why you just don't see dramatic shifts in this race, because there are just so few persuadable or undecided voters, Nancy.
Anthony, one thing that's so interesting that your poll picked up on is another slight shift among voters who say the economy is super important to them towards Harris. Voters feel like the economy is getting a little better. So how are those changing views on the economy actually impacting the race?
Well, here's how. It's a little bit better, right? I've got to point out, most people still say it's bad. In fact, I'll tell you, you look inside the polling, Republicans overwhelmingly say the economy is bad, no matter how well they're doing financially And the party out of the White House often does say that about the national economy. So there's a limit to how much this is going to move. But to the extent that it did move up towards good, the reason that that helps Harris on net is that for people who say they think the economy is getting better or improving or even just holding steady, she wins those votes. Maybe that's not a surprise for the party that is in power, but Donald Trump has the advantage on the economy, especially among those who say that it's even getting worse. All of which is to say, you're right, that she does basically do better when people feel better about the economy, including their own financial situation. And that has helped her cut in to his advantage on the economy, as you mentioned, Nancy.
You also explored shifting views on the issue of immigration, Anthony, and in particular, Trump's plans for mass deportations. What did you learn there?
Well, yeah. What we've seen, and we've seen this before, is if you test the idea of what happens if Donald Trump gets elected, would you favor or oppose the idea of deporting all people in the U.S. illegally? You do get a majority of voters, slight majority of voters in favor of that, but you get this overwhelming number among Trump voters in particular. Look, this for context, when you ask about immigrants, whether they contribute more to society, Donald Trump voters are less likely to say so. They're more likely to say that immigration is a problem, that the border is a crisis. So all of that is consistent with that narrative as well. But I will add this. This is a test in a poll that is a sort of abstract idea. When you get to particulars of policy on this or any policy, that can change. But that dialogue right now, that dynamic is still out there, sort of to be determined. But this is what you get, especially among Trump voters, on the general idea, Nancy.
And Kamala Harris headed to the border later this week. It'll be interesting to see what she has to say. Anthony Salvanto, thank you so much, as always.
Thank you.
Let's turn now to the conflict in the Middle East. Israel's cabinet has declared a, quote, special situation nationwide after an exchange of airstrikes between their army and Hezbollah. Officials in Lebanon say that at least 350 people are dead and more than 1,200 others wounded. Israel's military spokesman says they have struck 1,300 Hezbollah assets across Lebanon. The bloodshed is the deadliest between Israel and Hezbollah since 2006. Congress racing against the clock to avoid a shutdown has become a new normal in Washington. But next, what's in the bipartisan agreement that would avert next week's deadline? You're streaming America Decides. Oh, happy day. Congressional leaders have agreed on a short-term spending deal to keep the federal government open for nearly 3 months. Lawmakers are facing an October 1st deadline to get this new bill passed to avert a partial government shutdown. The legislation includes around $231 million in additional funding for the Secret Service. Let's bring in our Nicole Killian, who covers Capitol Hill and has been keeping track of all of this. So, Nicole, walk us through this spending agreement. What does it do? How were they finally able to meet in the middle here?
Well, there's not much to walk through because it's pretty basic and keeps the lights on for the next 2.5 months. And that's really the objective of Republican negotiators and Democratic negotiators. They really wanted this to kind of be a bare bones, clean CR, as you're very familiar with, just to kind of get this through. So what's in it is the money to keep the government running. What's also in it, as you mentioned, is this $231 million for Secret Service. And this will go primarily to the more immediate needs of the agency with respect to campaign purposes. There are also some conditions tied to it to making sure that the Secret Service complies with congressional oversight in the wake of those assassination attempts against the former president. What's not in this package, there's not the SAVE Act, which was part of that 6-month continuing resolution that Speaker Johnson initially put before the House last week. That was a measure that would require citizenship, proof of citizenship in order to register for federal elections. So that's out, as well as some disaster aid, which is something that the administration and Democrats were pushing for.
And that was really the key to getting Democratic buy-in, right? Was getting rid of the SAVE Act and reducing it from 6 months to 3 months. Why is that? Explain why Democrats were so keen on having this be a 3-month government spending bill?
Well, part of it was, in terms of that SAVE Act, a lot of Democrats, both in the House and Senate, saw that as a poison pill. I mean, for the most part, you don't necessarily need to show proof of citizenship to vote, right? I mean, American citizens typically vote. That's how the process works. So they felt that this was kind of unnecessary politicking messaging on the part of Republicans. And again, that's part of why they wanted this to be a clean process. And they were also leery about extending this into next year, obviously, given the state of the elections, what may transpire after. So that's why they kind of favored something more short term rather than that 6-month package.
Right. They want the Biden administration to have one more bite at the apple when it comes to setting a longer-term government funding package that would basically reflect their priorities for another year. And so what has the reaction been from House Republicans and even from the Trump camp that were pushing Speaker Johnson to hold firm and to keep that SAVE Act in the funding package?
Well, I think for right now, Speaker Johnson is keeping his fingers crossed, right? You know, he made clear a short time ago to reporters that that's really what he intends to do over these next couple of days to try to build support for this package. Take a listen.
We try to follow regular process, regular order as much as possible, give everybody the opportunity to do their job.
So you're going to meet with these members on the Rules Committee, the Masseys and the Normans, and try to...
Of course, I'll do what I do every week around here and every day, and that's talk with all the members and build consensus.
So step one in terms of building that consensus starts with the Rules Committee, which is meeting today to make sure there aren't a lot of defections, because the Rules Committee, as you know, can very well kill this package out of the gate. And so the Speaker doesn't want that to happen. So that is why he is talking to some members on that committee. But at the end of the day, this is going to require bipartisan support. And that's yet another reason why Democrats were on board with this. They've said all along this has to be a bipartisan process. So if they can get it out of rules, get it to the floor, we think by this coming Wednesday, then the Senate stands poised to try to move this package forward as well.
And the reality is there was not a huge appetite on Capitol Hill for a fight that could court a government shutdown, right? All these House members, they want to be back in their districts. They want to be campaigning, and they don't want to take the risk of being blamed if the lights go out in the federal government.
Yeah, particularly in an election year. So that's why, even though the former president might have said, hey, don't take this deal if it doesn't include the SAVE Act, the reality is this doesn't play well, particularly for those more moderate Republicans in swing districts who can't argue in a good way why the government may be shutting down. So it's really best for both sides to try to get this done as quickly as possible.
Right. You even had Mitch McConnell saying, if this doesn't pass, we're going to be the party that gets blamed. Nicole Killian, congressional correspondent, thanks so much for breaking it down. I appreciate it.
You bet.
Interest rates and gas prices are on their way down. So how much does that help the Harris campaign? Our political panel will assess that and the state of the race next. You're streaming America Decides. New CBS News polling finds registered voters have a more positive view of the economy now compared to just last month. The poll also reveals that Vice President Harris has narrowed her deficit with Donald Trump among those who call the economy a major factor in their vote. She is doing better. So let's bring in our political panel to discuss this. Molly Ball and Braxton Booker. Molly is a senior political correspondent at the Wall Street Journal, and Braxton is a national political correspondent with Politico. So great to see both of you. And Braxton, I will start with you and that poll. You know, the Biden campaign and then now the Harris campaign, they struggled for months and months to try to convince the American public that they would be better stewards on the economy, no matter what they did, labeling it Bidenomics, highlighting inflation coming down. It never seemed to make any difference. And now suddenly we've got this poll that shows that perhaps she is making headway. Is that because gas prices are coming down or interest rates are coming down? What's going on, you think?
Look, I think it's a combination of those things, but I will echo what somebody told me during CBC week, in that Democrats had the good policies. They just had the wrong messenger when Biden was atop the ticket. Now you have a much more articulate, much more nimble messenger, and I think that is helping some Americans change their views about how the economy is going. But what you also see is that those who don't view their personal economic fortunes as being any better, those folks are still very firmly against Biden and what Harris is trying to sell right now, and they are firmly breaking for Trump. So she still has some room to grow in that regard and try to sell her economic message and what she will do if she were to get to the White House to help them.
That might be why she's going back to Pittsburgh this week to unveil what she says are more economic proposals. Molly, you just went to Ohio and did a deep dive into the Senate race there. And one of the things that our poll looked at was this allegation that Trump and his running mate, J.D. Vance, have been making over and over again about Haitian migrants in Ohio eating cats and dogs. And guess what? The poll found that nearly 2/3 of voters think that that is not true. They think it is baloney, and certainly it has been debunked. So based on your reporting there, why do you think that Trump and Vance keep repeating this, even though it doesn't appear to be getting any traction with the voters they might need to win?
Well, what Senator Vance has said is that the point of highlighting this falsehood is to call attention to the immigration issue and to call attention specifically to the effect that these migrants have had on the small town of Springfield, Ohio. I was mostly on the eastern side of the state, about 3 hours east of Springfield. But certainly anywhere you go in Ohio, you can see that immigration is a top concern for the voters there. And so I'm actually very encouraged that so many people believe the media and not the politicians when we have told them, because there's so many other things that we try to convince people are not true, that they persist in believing for whatever motivated reason. But the immigration issue is clearly on the top of people's minds, particularly more conservative-leaning voters, particularly the Republican challenger to Ohio Senator Sherrod Brown, the Democrat, who I think is in the fight of his political life. This is the hardest re-election he's ever faced, and part of the reason is he's up against he's a sort of progressive populist. He's up against a right-wing populist, and it's a sort of competition between different forms of populism. And the Republican Bernie Moreno is echoing Trump, saying, if you're really on the side of working people, if you really want to make Ohioans' lives better, that starts with shutting down illegal immigration. That starts with deporting migrants who aren't supposed to be here, shutting the border, and they claim that that is what would make life better for people in Ohio. And the town of Springfield, where the governor and many others have said the economy of the town has benefited from these legal migrants coming in to take jobs that nobody else wanted to take or was available to take. For many other people in the town, it has been a story about changes that are not within their control and their community changing in ways that they weren't asked about. So it's really a microcosm for the issues in the Senate race and in the presidential race.
That's really fascinating. Go ahead.
Yeah, one point I'd like to add on that, too, is that Bernie Moreno is someone who was born in Bogota, Colombia, who came to the country when he was 5 and became a citizen when he was 18. So he has an immigrant story to tell. And in telling that, he's like, I did it the right way. You look at me, I am part of the American dream. And therefore, all these other folks who are here and came here illegally did not do it the right way. So therefore, vote for me because I believe in Trump's immigration policy, right?
Although the Haitian migrants they've been talking about also came here legally.
Illegally, yes.
So I want to ask you both about Mark Robinson, the Lieutenant Governor of North Carolina, and this controversy that is now engulfing his campaign regarding things that he reportedly said on a porn site 10 years ago, talking about being a black Nazi, what have you. He's refusing to step down today. The Republican Governors Association said they're basically cutting him off. They're not going to pay for any more ads. You've got Republicans from the state basically saying they think he's going to lose. And yet we have seen in North Carolina before that you can have one party win in the governor's race and another party win for president. So how are the campaigns feeling about this situation right now?
Well, look, we've seen the reports that Republicans are quietly, or not, maybe not so quietly, asking Mark Robinson to go away, to step off the campaign, to help save not just Trump's chances in the state, but also try to save Republican supermajority in the state legislature. But, Mark Robinson didn't get to this point by being a wallflower, right? He is going to be defiant. He's going to lean into that defiance and lean into that Trump streak that folks have compared him to, right? And you're not going to see him back away, even if you see most of the Republican Party leave him alone. What you're going to see, hopefully, is, some Republicans come to their senses and maybe coalesce around Mark Robinson and say, like, hey, come on, this is going to be a drag on the party. But right now, I don't think he's going to heed to that advice.
Molly, I want to play for you a soundbite that we just got from a J.D. Vance rally in Charlotte, North Carolina today. Dan Bishop, the congressman there, was talking about Mark Robinson. Let's take a listen to what he had to say.
Last week in North Carolina, Democrats and allied media rolled out a meticulously timed and coordinated character assassination and immediately sent mailings, ads, broadcasts, and posts smearing all Republicans by association while claiming the high ground.
So they're trying to spin this as, character assassination by the media and, opposing campaigns. Obviously, none of what has been reported by CNN and other outlets has been debunked as of yet.
And the problem for Republicans is that even before this new reporting, there was plenty of stuff out there about Mark Robinson. And in fact, what I find so interesting about the ad that the Harris campaign released tying Trump to Mark Robinson is it didn't use any of that new material.
Right.
It was using his posts about abortion primarily, which were already in the public domain, which were already known about even before he won this Republican primary. Republicans knew when they nominated him that he was someone with a long history of inflammatory and offensive comments. And even knowing that, they made him their gubernatorial nominee. He was behind in this race long before this new CNN report with, shocking new material, new to the public, not new in terms of time. But again, he was already behind in this race, and it was because of an abundant paper trail of comments similar to the outrageous ones that were newly reported. So all of this is a problem that Republicans knew about and decided to nominate him anyway. And the Harris campaign believes that is a big part of why they hope that this will resonate, is because it is, to them, that's similar to Trump, right? This is someone who was known to have this offensive history that the party chose to embrace anyway. So in tying him to Trump, they're not just saying, here's someone who supported and endorsed this guy. They're saying, look at these sort of birds of a feather.
And what makes this so pivotal very quickly, Bracton, is that this is a battleground state Trump won last time around, and it's hard for him to chart a path to 270 this time around if he doesn't win North Carolina.
That's right, and you see that the Harris campaign is really making a play for North Carolina this time, investing money, investing time. She's made a lot of announcements there, including her economic package a couple of months ago. So North Carolina definitely is in play, and it's also because of Mark Robinson.
Yet another twist and turn in this race. Bracton Booker, Molly Ball, thank you both so much. Vice President Harris or former President Trump, one of them, will sit in the Oval Office after January 20th. But now you have the chance to feel what it's like to sit at the Resolute desk. It's all thanks to a high-tech replica from the White House Historical Association that is located just 1 block away from 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. I pass it every day. It has just opened. It gives visitors a glimpse of both the Oval Office and the Cabinet Room. The exhibit also has a smaller scale model of every room in the White House and recreations of a cabinet meeting and a state dinner, so visitors can get a feel for what it's like to be in, yes, the room where it happens. There are new concerns about election night chaos in the battleground state of Georgia. A look at the voting changes being pushed through by pro-Trump election officials at this late date and the potential legal challenges. You're streaming America Decides.
What I don't want to do is set a precedent that we are okay with speed over accuracy.
We are talking about all these last-minute changes, and it makes me question whether members of this board are operating in good faith.
Those were opposing Georgia Election Board officials. With just 43 days until Election Day, Georgia's pro-Trump Election Board is changing the rules. On Friday, the state board voted 3-2 to require ballots to be hand-counted on Election Day, despite warnings from key Republican figures in the state about what that would mean for counting. Derek Mueller is a professor of law at Notre Dame Law School and joins us now. So good to see you, Professor. Explain to us what's behind the push for rule changes in Georgia and who do these changes favor?
Sure. So, I mean, the rule changes don't really favor anybody, at least these ones in particular. The goal here is for Georgia precincts to hand tabulate the ballots. Now, that's not counting every office, adding up the votes for Trump and for Harris and other people. It's making sure that they're counting the pieces of paper and that the pieces of paper match the totals in the machine. Now, typically that's done in the county sometime later in the process, but the goal now is to put that all on election night. So the consequence might be that as you're trying to manually tabulate all these ballots on election night and counting all these pieces of paper, you might see a delay in Georgia's election results, which is certainly something nobody wants to see. But the question there, I think in that clip you played, is a question of speed versus accuracy.
And is it necessary to impose this new rule? Was there something wrong with the way the counting was being done before?
Right. So I think proponents of the rule would say, look, we want to make sure that at the precinct level, we have an accurate tabulation of all of the ballots in the machine. And then when it goes to the county is doing it as well. And to the extent that there's some discrepancy, we can find some spot in the chain where there's a problem. But opponents, I think, are saying, listen, the county has done this before. Why do we need the precincts to do this? It sort of feeds into conspiracy theories that the county is adding ballots that weren't there on election night or whatever it might be. So, again, different ways of doing it. Different states let the county do it. Other states have the precincts do it. But in Georgia, I think the question is really changing the rules very close in time to the election and what that means.
Yeah, in fact, Georgia Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger has already told the state election board that the new rules are dangerously late in this election process and probably illegal. So what kind of legal action can we expect here from his office and from others? And what could that mean?
Sure. Late in the process is because election administrators have been trained. There are training books and there are videos and there are things that are trying to get everyone up to speed about what the rules are. So when you change those rules, you now have to go back and redo all the guidance or give updated guidance to hundreds of thousands of poll workers across the state, however many it might be. But sometimes administrative boards like this, they can only act with certain notice provisions and certain amount of time and with certain legal backing. And the governor's or the Secretary of State's office has said you don't have any authority under state law to add these requirements. This might be some practices that some precincts or some counties have done in the past, but you don't have the authority to provide these kinds of rules. Now, the board has shot back and said we have the authority to develop uniform, non-discriminatory rules. These are the same rules that are going to apply to all counties. But you might go to state court in Georgia and say, listen, the board lacks this authority. Just make sure this rule doesn't take effect by election day.
I want to ask you about another key state, Nebraska, where state legislators are trying to usher through a bill that would make it a winner-take-all state, like most states. Right now in Nebraska, the two electoral votes are split, which means that one can go one way, one could go the other way. So what would this change mean for the Harris and Trump campaigns, and do you think it's going to happen?
Right. There are 538 electoral votes, and you wouldn't believe that we are fighting intensely over one electoral vote. There is Nebraska's 2nd congressional district is one that has gone toward Democrats in recent years. And the question is, if we can switch that, Republicans in Nebraska say rather than a 4-1 split, maybe Donald Trump gets all 5 electoral votes, and maybe one vote is all you need to tip you over the edge. But right now we're seeing that while there's a lot of Republican support for it, a lot of the Democrats in Nebraska have opposed it. There's a filibuster kind of system in place. It requires 2/3 support to get through the legislature at this point, and it's not clear that Republicans have enough backing to get that through.
Yeah, because that could really upend everyone's predictions about what might happen on election night. Derek Mueller, professor from Notre Dame University, thank you so much for joining us. I appreciate it.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
World leaders are exploring solutions to climate change in New York this week. Coming up, why voters' views on this issue don't always match up with those who represent them. You're streaming America Decides. Welcome back to America Decides. Climate change has not been one of the key talking points in this election cycle when compared to other issues like the economy or immigration. But the planet's future is still on the minds of many voters. To mark New York City Climate Week, we're exploring the intersection of climate with the presidential race. National environmental correspondent David Schechter joins us now to discuss. David, it is so great to see you. And research shows when it comes to climate change, there is this disconnect between voters who are overwhelmingly concerned about our overheating planet and the politicians that represent them. How wide is that disconnect?
It's a great question. You know, there's some really well done research from Yale University, and it shows 70% of Americans now think global warming will hurt future generations, and 62% say Congress should do more about it. But in many cases, we found their elected officials have voted against efforts to combat climate change, particularly by voting against the Inflation Reduction Act, which made more than $391 billion available for climate solutions. The IRA is the most significant piece of climate legislation in American history. Tony Leiserowitz from Yale did this public opinion research.
If nobody's knocking on the political leader's door, if nobody's showing up at their town halls, if nobody's calling their office and saying, I want you to take action, I want you to lead on this issue, then they conclude that this is an issue that their constituents don't care about. It's not true, but they're not hearing it enough from their voters.
So, David, this CBS News project investigates what that disconnect looks like in congressional districts across the country. And you went to the swing state of Georgia. What did you find there?
Well, I went to Georgia's 1st congressional district, which is around Savannah, which is a beautiful place to visit. And I met with Republican Buddy Carter in his reliably red district. 53% of his constituents say they are worried about climate change and how it will impact future generations. But Carter votes against environmental issues 96% of the time, and he voted against the Inflation Reduction Act. In fact, every Republican in Congress voted against it. Carter told me he was opposed to a non-climate provision in that bill that lowered the cost of prescription drugs, but he said stifled innovation. Is there a contradiction in benefiting from the IRA, but then also saying, I'm not going to vote for this thing?
Why did the leadership put all that together? Why didn't they let us vote on it separately? It probably would have gotten some Republican votes if they had let us do that.
Mm-hmm. You think so?
I'm sure it would.
Would you have voted for it if it was standalone?
I didn't look at it. That was so egregious to me, the prescription drug portion, that's all it took.
That's an interesting exchange. So that's Georgia, but how about the rest of the country?
Yeah. So it's an interesting question. You know, with billions of dollars are now flowing to communities across the country from the Inflation Reduction Act, kicking off a green energy boom. 2/3 of that money is going to Republican districts like Carter's. Our CBS reporters at stations across the country have been talking to voters who want climate action, but are also finding that some of their elected officials are still casting doubt on the seriousness of this problem that we all face, which is climate change.
Yep, voters have long been ahead of lawmakers on this issue. We're looking forward to the full report. David Schechter, thanks so much. This morning, President Biden made women's sports history on Pennsylvania Avenue. He hosted the National Women's Soccer League champs, Gotham FC, to celebrate their title at the White House. They are the first NWSL team to take part in this time-honored tradition that men's teams have been participating in for a long time. Gotham FC won their championship in November, just 1 year after they finished in last place. That is inspiring. And that does it for today. We'll be back with another edition of America Decides tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. The Daily Report with John Dickerson starts right now. Have a good one.